The regular season is heating up, new stars are emerging, and that means more opportunities to win up to 25 times your cash on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection on a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's that easy. Let it fly to turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Watch your favorite players and get paid doing it this basketball season. See your entries make progress during the game or make new entries for the second half and the fourth quarter. 3-pointers, assists, rebounds, and everything in between are yours for the taking. Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
So our podcast is called Right and Wrong.
Are these your notes?
These
Are these your notes about what we're going to say?
Anything
Nailed it.
is the short answer.
So how many novels did you not finish?
Oh my God, so many.
It was perfect. What's she talking about? This is nonsense.
Ooh, a spicy question. I love it.
This is it, guys. The big secret to getting published is you have to write a good book. You heard it here first. Hello, and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. I'm Jamie, and joining me today, all the way from across the pond, is the Bent Agency's own Claire Draper. Hi, Claire. Welcome to the show.
Hi, happy to be here.
I'm actually really excited to chat with you because I've had a lot of agents on the podcast, but never a US-based agent. So I'm kind of interested to see if everything sort of runs the same or it's a little bit different. So let's kick off in the most logical place, the beginning. When did you know you wanted to work in books and publishing?
It's funny. My story was like, I always knew I wanted to work in books, and that was what I'd been telling people. But recently, my parents shipped a bunch of my old binders and yearbooks and whatever to me. And I was putting them away and trying to find space for them and my partners in my new apartment. And I found a letter I'd written to one of my teachers so that they could write a letter of recommendation for NYU or whatever. And in this, I write about how much I wanted to be a writer and I wanted to be involved with books. And it's funny that the writing is very I was 16 and it's very passionate and not the most beautifully structured, but it's there's so much passion there. Yeah. But I always knew, not always, I knew from much earlier than most people. I was 14, 15, I wanted to work in books, and I used to want to write. I used to want to be a writer. I wrote a lot of fan fiction in high school. And then I was I'm going to write my own original books and blah, blah, blah. And that was the plan until I was I don't know that I have enough ideas to pay the bills, and I would need a job in between. So I was I'm going to get a job in publishing. And at the time when I was going through college, the We Need Diverse Books conversation was happening, and lots of other conversations, especially in the children's book space, that I was very aware of as someone who was still very much reading and enjoying YA. So I was I'm gonna get involved in publishing, and then it kind of sorted itself out that I wanted to be on the agenting side eventually, yada yada yada. But I was I want to be involved with books because at some point I realized not necessarily that my ideas for books were bad, but other people have such great ideas and execute them so beautifully that I wanted to help them get there. Yeah. And I wanted to pay the bills. So, not that anyone in agenting, or at least anyone my level or younger, gets paid so well, but we wanted, I was I need a paycheck. So that was my compromise. I did what I set out to do, for sure.
Yes.
In a roundabout way.
Yeah, I think in my experience, that's everyone that works in publishing. It's always a roundabout way. It's very rare that someone goes straight there. They knew exactly what they wanted to do and they hit the bullseye straight away.
Yeah, I very much knew I wanted to work in and around publishing because I think like I had so many books on my shelves. And, you know, if you have an author lined up on a shelf, at some point you notice that like all of the publisher imprint logos at the bottom of the book are all the same. You're like, oh, this person gets published by Avon. What's Avon? Or this person gets published by Little Brown. What's Little Brown? So at some point as like a teenager, I became very aware of like what imprints and publishing houses were and down the rabbit hole from there.
Yeah, that's a young age to be aware of those kinds of things, I think.
Yeah.
Most people don't even know what a literary agent is until they've tried to get a job already in publishing.
Oh yeah, I think I was in a group Slack with a bunch of like young agents and whatever, and we're like, how do you guys explain what your job is to people who don't know what a literary agent is? And everyone had a bunch of different answers, and like, you know, I'm a real estate agent but for books, or I think the one I always use is like movie stars have agents, authors need agents, you know, like same thing.
A very different relationship though.
Very different relationship. And also people's eyes kind of glaze over if you start to be like, you know, I like start to break down the mechanics of it unless they're like very genuinely interested in books.
So once you had your degree, you were ready to go. What was your approach to getting a foot in the door?
Well, I mean, while I was getting my degree, I had summers off and also time in the year because I went to school at NYU. So, you know, a lot of other people, they may go to school elsewhere and there's not necessarily a publishing scene, but part of my intent was publishing is in New York City. And that's part of why I wanted to go to NYU. So my first internship was when I was home for a summer in Los Angeles at this small independent publishing house. And they were quirky and weird. And they kind of, you know, they were, I think, a team of like 3 or 4 people. So when you're that small, you do everything. Yeah. And it was super fun to like kind of get to learn that way. And then they helped me get an internship at an agency the kind of following year. And, you know, I know most people are like, oh, I interned for a semester. And I was like, you know, I kind of was a barnacle and I just stayed around for the whole school year at the next place, which was Inkwell Management, also where I got my first job. So that was my junior year. And then senior year, I took off and just focused on my schoolwork and graduated and got a job at the Strand, and then which is our famous bookstore chain, actually, here in the city. And then was interviewing on my days off. And I think I interviewed at HarperCollins one day, or I was interviewing at HarperCollins in various jobs. And they were kind of like, you know, I think they had positions open in marketing and publicity. And I was like, you know, that sounds nice, but I kind of wanted to work much earlier on in the process. Yeah. And so I ended up interviewing at my agency in the morning one day, and I had a follow-up interview with HarperCollins in the afternoon. But the agency, Inkwell Management, I interviewed, and then they offered me the job, and then I emailed HarperCollins to be like, I got a job. I'm not coming to the interview this afternoon. Which I'm sure my life would have gone in a very different direction had I taken that interview in the afternoon and considered them both at the same time or whatever. But I was very determined to kind of work with books on the earlier side. And Inkwell, I already knew the people there. Like, you know, I was just, I'm one of the, my old colleagues there. She and I are working on a book together right now. We have on submission. So like, you know, all those people I'm not super in touch with because of the pandemic, but I was stopping by the office even after I left.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And it's in many ways, it's a small industry, publishing, whilst being like stretched globally across the world. But that's really nice that you made that connection. You still have that connection with the place that kind of you started up. Yeah,
very much so. I like a lot of the books and my experiences there are like very formative ones and stuff like that.
Well, so far it sounds kind of similar to in the UK. In terms of the way that you've got into the industry. You've just got to throw yourself at it. You've got to love it. You've got to just take every opportunity you can and just go for it.
Yeah, it's pretty much how you get a job in any industry across the board. Is it's generally the same sort of deal.
And now that you are an agent, full time, you are repping picture books, middle grade, young adult, graphic novels, and adult.
Yeah.
Where do you find the time in the day?
I think my partner wonders that for sure. But no, I mean, it's funny, a chunk of graphic novels on my list, it's like I sign a graphic novel and like, it's not like a picture book where you can turn it around and it's done and the like labor, the author or illustrator's labor is done in 6 months or a year. A graphic novel can take 2-3 years, give or take. So, and then sometimes, that's not just one person on a project, that's 2 or more. So yeah, I don't necessarily always have the time in the day, but I think also I am very fascinated, kind of sign the books that I genuinely enjoy for pleasure. I know some other agents are like, oh, I work on middle grade for my job, but I really like adult thriller or whatever. But and that's how they separate like work life and personal life or whatever. But for me, I always wanted to work on the books that I thought needed to be in the world and that I genuinely enjoyed. So like, I don't really have very much middle grade prose on my list. And YA prose, I think I have a handful of authors who do that, and they do keep me busy. And a lot of my graphic novels are spread out across the age ranges. And then the adult books, they're nonfiction. So I sell those on proposal a majority of the time. But, I think other people, their jobs are 9 to 6 and they're like, counting the hours until they get to clock out, or they're counting the hours until lunch happens. And for me, I'm like, this is always what I wanted to do. I wake up thinking about work. I go to sleep thinking about work, not in an unhealthy way, but I'm just like, oh, I'm so excited I get to talk about XYZ with an editor tomorrow, or I get to reading a book that like didn't exist before my client wrote it. And like, there's still some sort of magic and joy for that in me. So yeah, time in the day is, there are only 24 hours and it's funny. Some people say we all have the same 24 hours. I'm like, we don't. Beyonce has a different 24 hours than, like a single parent in, like a minimum wage job. It is different, but I think it's also, making time for joy and also making things accessible. Like some agents I know still keep track of their submissions on like a pad of paper.
Wow.
And I'm like, I use a spreadsheet. And even then I'm trying to figure out how to move a bunch of my data over to like a project management software. So like things are automated. So like, there are all sorts of different things, but I am the type of person who I'm like, I need to make this more efficient because technology is too good at this point for us not to make this more efficient.
Yeah. It'll help you out in the long run.
Yeah. I'm like hand like dictating or like copying and pasting all your submission emails is so time consuming rather than just doing like a mail merge or like a mail blast that automatically fills in names, which in some ways is impersonal, but I can hand change if I think an editor needs a specific note. But I am very much for streamlining things to do a more efficient job.
That definitely makes sense.
We are in 2022. I don't need to hand dictate emails.
Yeah, exactly. Mixing things up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who spends most of their time surrounded by the UK literary publishing scene, do you have any overseas clients?
Whole bunch of them. I think the kind of interesting thing about being an agent is sometimes you're signing a client and you're like, this client will do well in a specific market. Here in the US, like picture books, it's really helpful when the author or illustrator can go to schools And the same is true for middle grade. The school and library market is a big factor here. But also, kind of the nice thing about being an agent is, and specifically as things kind of continue to evolve and doing things virtually, but I can sign clients all over the world and it's not an issue. I think the only time it's an issue when you're trying, is happening right now, is when you're trying to coordinate a meeting between a marketing person who's in the UK or the East Coast, a client who's in Australia, and a illustrator who's in Hawaii.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, those are all the wrong, all mismatched time zones. I think someone's waking up at 5 a.m., someone's staying up until 1 a.m. And I think I'm taking a call on a Saturday. I'm like, we're all not doing things. We're all working at weird times for that specific call. But, I do sign clients all over the world because I think especially a large part of my list is graphic novels, and publishers aren't too particular about making sure the author / illustrator creator is present for book signings, because that's not as much of a factor in sales when it comes to graphic novels. So you can have someone who's anywhere in the world. And a lot of my colleagues, both in the US and in the UK, have clients all over the world. I have a client in LA who's working with a client in the UK on a graphic novel we're going out with soon. I have a client in India who's working on a picture book with Beaming Books, is a independent publisher in Minnesota. So there's kind of no limit to signing a person, especially in the technologically advanced age. If someone had to mail a manuscript, I could see that being a sort of hindrance, but we have email.
Yes, exactly. And I think, with one of the things to come out of the last few years is that everyone's now been forced to be very on top of virtual meetings and Zoom and all these bits and bobs.
Yeah. Well, and the Bent agency was largely kind of doing that beforehand because we have an office in the UK, we have an office in the US, but we very much operate as one office. We're not independent branches. And the head of our agency, Jenny, has always been based not in New York, or at least for a long time, ever since she founded the agency. So, to my recollection. So we are very much an office that we're live where you want to live. We're all going to show up virtually for Zoom. So I know the rest of the world was what is this Zoom thing in March 2020? But we were oh yeah, we've been using it for a while.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
You guys hit the ground running.
And our agency was built to it because I think not just having sort of two offices, but having people who very much valued time and space and, their family time and getting away from your work and stuff. So that was one of the things I particularly liked, because when I was looking for a kind of different job and stuff or different agency, I was my family's in California. I want to be able to fly to California on a whim for a grandmother's 80th birthday or for a cousin's high school graduation. That was stuff that I'm super sentimental. That's stuff that's way important to me. And so I wanted to be able to do that and not be hindered by, you have to be at your desk 9 to 5, whether you're actually working. So,
right, yeah, sure. So if you receive a submission, you open it up and you see that the author is from somewhere overseas, that doesn't affect how you approach the submission at all?
I usually don't even notice where they are until I'm requesting to have a call with them and I want to sign them. And I'm trying to figure out where in the world they are and what time I need to set up a call.
Okay.
Yeah. Very, very rarely does that have a bearing for me, at least. I know other agents do other books or different types of books and that may matter, but for me, it certainly doesn't. And to the best of my knowledge, for most people in the US, it doesn't matter. Is again, depending on the book and depending on writing capabilities and stuff like that, or like, working in translation, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, because so much of what I'm signing is visual, is a graphic novel, but people's English is quite good. So I don't even, especially in something that they've written and like can craft. So I most of the time don't even know that I don't even know where they're based until I'm looking at their bio and I'm like, oh, they're based in Singapore. Okay, good to know. And again, really has no bearing until I'm trying to figure out at what point in the day I'm having a call with them.
Oh, okay. Have you got one of those clocks that has all of the different time zones on it?
Oh, very funny. No, but if you search Google and you're like this time zone to this time zone, there are a couple websites that like you can plug in, like, it'll show you all of the times throughout the day for both of yours, and you can figure out what works. But yeah, I was trying to find an app for that last couple days ago, and I'm like, because mental math is not is my strong suit for like me figuring out what time it is for my family in California. Otherwise, I'm like, still great, but like trying to do 3 time zones and no, not helpful.
Yeah. When you're thinking in all these different, and you're going to mix them up, it's like, I've done it many times. Speaking of submissions, the Bent Agency submission pack is short blurb about the author, the query section, and then the first 10 pages, which is around 10,000 words, I imagine, in most cases.
Yeah.
But no synopsis. And I know that in most UK agencies, that a synopsis is always asked for as part of the submission package. Is that not as common in the US?
It's not as common, but also we have such a variety of submissions. So like a handful of my colleagues work on picture books. A handful of my colleagues work on middle grade. So it feels a little funky to ask for a synopsis when like the plot is kind of obvious.
Yeah, sure.
Or you're like, I'm writing a romance novel. They're going to end up together. Like that's not the synopsis is happily ever after. So and like a couple of my colleagues are on query manager, and I am as well. So like, I think I don't ask for a synopsis, but I do ask for you to do an elevator pitch. Because I think that to me is more helpful, like really narrowing down what you envision, sort of the quick pitch of your book. But I think like my colleagues and I think this is true of every agent, is we're all looking for different things when we're trying to suss out whether or not this is something we want to work on. But yeah, in the US, synopsis I've definitely found is not required, though I think some agents might be tending that way. Again, don't quote me on that, but I've found that like some people are finding that they're like, I was appointed by this point in the plot, but I had to read 100 pages to figure that out. So I don't know if we're going to tend that way, but generally kind of the idea for the US is, query letter, 10 pages or first chapter or whatever it is, and your bio, and that's pretty much it, to the best of my knowledge. But that, every agency kind of does something a little different in terms of what they ask for. So
sure. And then every agent as well will have their own approach to what they're looking for. And then do you ask for the synopsis when you ask for the full manuscript?
I do sometimes. A lot of what I am reviewing is graphic novels, so there's kind of a synopsis in that anyways, because or at least a summary of the book, because they can't have drawn 300 pages on spec. So that tends to be included in those sorts of works instead. Sometimes I ask for a synopsis. It sort of depends on whether or not I can envision where the book is going, or based on the query, if I think the plot is going to need that work.
Sure.
Yeah. So it depends.
And when you do open your submissions, sit down to go through them, is there anything that you're really like that jumps out at you in a query letter?
I think it's just original ideas. I think I consume a lot of content. I think we all are right now and we all have been in the last couple of years. But like, I watch a chunk of TV. I read a lot of variety when it comes to genre. And I've also always been the kind of person who will watch something and kind of have the ending figured out very early on. It's very rare you surprise me, and I don't need to be surprised, but I like it when something feels brand new. And sometimes authors hear that and they get afraid and they're like, but this exists and this exists. I like it when something feels like, specifically, like if you're a person whose type of story hasn't been told. Like there's this book coming out, I can't remember the name, but there's this romance novel coming out and it's a trans love story. And it's like historical period piece, I want to say. And I am so freaking excited about it because I can't, even trying to find queer adult romance novels doesn't really exist, especially period piece ones, especially with a trans character. Like there are so many layers to that I'm like, this just kind of doesn't exist. And it hits all of the check boxes. There is also something to be said for, I've read this a million times and I want to read it 1,000,001 times. But I think I just get excited about like a story that sounds joyful. I am genuinely a person who's like, I love love, I love joy, I love a happy ending. Even if there is like some sort of tension or emotions that happen throughout, I'm a person who I love happy endings and I love crazy plot lines. I love intrigue. But I'm at the end of the day, I'm someone who I love a good story. I don't necessarily need to be surprised. I want to be excited. I want to be excited in the way that like everyone is excited about Our Flag Means Death. And it's funny because different people I mention, like I've been trying to sell this TV show to everyone, though it kind of sells itself. And some people I mentioned, Taika Waititi is in it, and they're like, "Oh, I'm sold," or they're like, "I'm like, it's Our Flag Means Death, but pirates," and they're like, "Oh, I'm sold." And other people I'm like, it's gay pirate fan fiction, and they actually fall in love, and they're like, "Okay, great, I'm sold." And other people I'm like, I was telling one of my clients, because my client Jess, she likes, a variety of things, but her wife specifically likes action, blood, car chases, the whole 9 yards. And I was like, this is going to have the action, blood, and guts that your wife likes, but going to have the romance, comedy, good storytelling that you enjoy. And it's comedy, and there are gay and non-binary characters. I was like, this is the show for you too.
You missed the pitch that would get me. All you'd have to say is Rhys Darby's in it.
Oh, Rhys Darby. But it's funny because not globally people don't know Rhys Darby, but like, I don't know that the US does as well. Or if they do, they're like, and he's the guy from that one movie, like like, and this is not necessarily a super different role for him, but like, his acting in this, so crisp and like just entertaining. It feels like what the stupid character in the second Harry Potter book, the professor, what's his name?
Oh,
you know who I'm talking about. What's his name?
I know who you're talking about.
He's the pompous one who all he knows is memory charms, and he's been stealing everyone's credit for years. Yes, Lockhart,
that's it. Flashheart's Blackadder.
Yeah, so Professor Lockhart, he is Professor Lockhart, but a good person and kind of naive who wants to become a pirate. Anyways, but it's like that same character of like handsome, but a little bit of a dimwit.
It's an excellent archetype. I love that character.
It's an excellent archetype. And so, I think I get excited about like, you know, like checking different boxes in weird ways in terms of submissions. Most of my clients are queer. So like I like getting submissions that are joyful queer stories. My client Johnny, when they submitted their first book to me, and it was originally titled Sunshine and Moonlight, now it's 1,500 Miles from the Sun. When they submitted that book to me, they comped it to One Day at a Time, and I don't even think I read the rest of the query. I think I saw that they comped it to One Day at a Time, and I immediately scrolled to the like first 10 pages.
Wow.
And read that and immediately requested. I was like, I don't even, and I might have like scrolled back to read the query at some point, but I was like, you comped it to one of my favorite TV shows and I am on board. So, you know, sometimes it's a kismet thing like that. But I think for me specifically, I like joyful stories. And One Day at a Time was such a perfect comp because there are emotions in that show. They do deal, the reboot anyways, they deal with like heavy themes sometimes. And, you know, the mom goes off her meds, or the daughter is dealing with sexual orientation and gender stuff. And like the brother is like everyone in the family deals with like very heavy things, but it's always in the way a sitcom, like a family sitcom, handles things. And you're like, oh, they're like, you guys handled it in a joyful way, and we're all gonna like hug each other and support each other kind of thing. I don't want it in a false way. I want it in a, you know, like you're supported way.
Yeah.
And I think 1,500 Miles from the Sun does that because, like, spoiler alert, the main character's dad is not great and doesn't support him and ends up kicking him out. But the main character has such a solid group of friends and a sister and a grandfather who all are rally behind him. And there's clearly so much love. Like, there's clearly so much love and joy in this book, even through the heartbreak. And I think that is always what I'm looking for, is like sort of the light in the darkness kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's also where I am mentally. Like, you know, a shitty thing can happen and I'm like, well, at least I got to eat a spoonful of peanut butter today. Or at least, you know, I got to go to the discount store and buy Lisa Frank stickers, you know. Like I'm very much like looking for the joy in the small moments where you can find it.
Yeah. I think the key takeaway there is, when authors are looking to submit to agents, do your research, because as you said, you essentially asked for the rest of the manuscript based off a single comp that was put in the query.
Yeah, and again, like, how could anyone know that is why I love One Day at a Time? But and again, so kismet. But I think I get people look. I specifically have on my sort of like requirements is like, I don't want suicide ideation or eating disorders or sexual assault, and I think there's maybe one other thing, but
gratuitous violence.
Gratuitous violence. And, you know, people see that and they're like, oh, but a character does this and does that. And I'm like, you know, this is really to filter out like sort of the big heavy hitting stuff that I was getting in my inbox. But I think that is more indicative of, you know, it's not so much that hard things can't happen in a book, but I really want, for me and the stories I'm looking for, the focus to be like joy, healing, happiness. And again, not that shitty things can't happen, but I like the On Our Flag Means Death, like a lot of the characters, the hard things they're dealing with are not, like, I think of the non-binary character, Jim. They're not dealing with stuff about their gender. They're dealing with stuff about the fact that they're like, they have a price on their head. You know what I mean? Like, I'm looking for characters to have problems that have nothing to do with who they are, or if it does, there's like there's still joy to be found. It's really hard for me specifically to read the 10th query where, it's like this person has an eating disorder and their dad kicked him out and they want to commit suicide and there's no hope left in the world. I'm like, I get that the genuine feelings, genuine things that happen to people, but and there is definitely a merit to having those stories exist. But I tend to want, especially because most of what I work on is kids' books, I want kids to know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that yeah, your bully sucks, but you can also go TP his house, or your grandparent passed away and that's awful, but it's okay to tell your cousin your older cousin you're struggling, or you know what I mean?
There's a place for those other books, but it's probably a different agent. It's not on your list, really.
Correct. And I just want people to know there's light to be found in dark times and stuff like that. So,
and a lovely thought to kind of round that off with.
Yeah.
So, April 2022.
Yes.
Are you currently open to submissions?
I'm open to submissions. I've been open since January, or I think I may have opened prematurely, days before Christmas of last year. But yeah, my goal for this year is to stay open throughout the year.
Okay.
Because I feel like people who I want people to not worry that oh, I have to finish this manuscript because Claire's going to close in 2 weeks. My goal is to stay open for the rest of the year.
Yeah. You don't want people to rush out there.
I don't want people to rush, but I also want people to feel like they have access without needing a referral or a sparkly award or something like that, Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask, are there any particular styles or characters that you're looking to add to your list this year? But I feel like we've quite thoroughly covered what you're after.
We have nailed that. I think if you're I continue to want joyful queer romance and things like that. That's, and the quirkier it is, the more I'm going to like it.
Amazing.
That's pretty much it.
I'm always drawn towards quirky things. You tell me it's quirky, I'm like, oh, I'm interested. That's it. Brilliant. That brings us to our final question. The often dreaded. Claire, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book would you take?
See, I was thinking about this last night, and I don't want to sound like an English major snob, because I was like, oh, I need a book that is long to keep me entertained. And I was like, yeah, but Don Quixote, Ulysses, I enjoy reading them, but not that much. And I was like, oh, a lot of my other books I can read in 4 to 6 hours. That all of my romance novels, I'll read it in an afternoon. That's hard to keep you entertained for days on end. So and then there's the shortcut way out of picking a nonfiction book of how to build a boat. So I think what I landed on was 12th Night or A Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare.
Okay.
And again, this still makes me sound like an English major snob. But the reason is because those plays are both they're comedies. They're very fun. But also that way I could memorize all the parts, which I think would be fairly time consuming. So
someone would come to rescue you and you'd seem like a complete mad person as you acted out all the parts of the play.
I think I'd be ready to, book Broadway. I'd be ready to work on the West End.
One-man show. That's great. I love that. I love those choices. I love both those plays. Yeah. And I mean, there's a reason Shakespeare is so iconic. And,
there are problems with Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare, but I remember in college, a professor saying that A Midsummer Night's Dream was his favorite. And, I agreed with him, and I couldn't figure out why I agreed with him until he said, every time I read this, and I read this year after year, I always discover something new. And I was like, that's kind of the fun part about it, is that there's always like a new little tidbit. There's something new to garner from it. And a lot of, I went to NYU, but literally all of my friends from college, nearly all of them are actors. So I've seen either them in productions or other people in productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream, or just other, like, I've seen so many productions of so many shows, but it is endlessly entertaining to see what you can do with with any sort of kind of piece of media that is no longer under copyright.
Oh yeah.
So there's something so entertaining about being like, I'm going to mess with this. One of my friends was in a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, but it was all like industrial and like coal minery. And she would better describe what it was. I just remember seeing her covered in like coal miner grime and stuff, which was obviously makeup, but it was such a cool set. And I remember thinking like, this was kind of not done before version of A Midsummer Night's Dream. So
amazing. And that brings us all the way back down to when we were talking about submissions. You've seen all these different Midsummer Night's Dream interpretations, which are the same but different, just like you were talking about when you read through submissions.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. You're kind of looking for the one that sweeps you off your feet.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I love those choices. No one's picked those yet, so happy to add those to the Desert Island Library. And thank you so much, Claire.
How is it that a bunch of UK agents haven't picked any Shakespeare? They've picked Shakespeare, right?
I think Shakespeare has been picked. But never A Midsummer Night's Dream or Twelfth Night.
Do they not like comedies? Is that the issue? They're like, oh, we like all of the tragedies. We're gonna read Hamlet and ghost stories over and over again.
That's it. We just want Hamlet. We're very, very, very depressed people over here in the UK. We just want Hamlet and Othello. Macbeth. But thank you so much, Claire, for coming on and sharing your experience through publishing and your joy with us.
Yeah, happy to do it.
It's been really fun and
it's
educational.
Finally spring here, so everyone is like, go outside today. We can see the sun. So I'm always looking for that little bit of sun.
That's very relatable in the UK as well. As soon as the sun peeks out, shorts on, t-shirts outside for 5 minutes, and then it's gone again.
Oh yeah.
For everyone listening, to keep up with everything that Claire's doing, you can follow on socials at Draper_Claire. I definitely recommend, if you do follow on TikTok, you can learn about why there are blank pages at the end of your books. I'm not going to spoil it, so go follow Claire. And if you're thinking of submitting, do head over to the Bent Agency website and make sure you read through all of the guidelines so that you do it in the correct way. To make sure you don't miss an episode of this podcast, follow on Twitter at Right and Wrong UK and on Instagram at Right and Wrong Podcast. Thanks again to Claire, and thanks to everyone listening. We'll catch you in the next episode.